It's been a while since we've done just like a normal split take.
Yes, a non best of the year or whatever.
I feel like it was last August or September when we did a normal split take with just a normal BFI movie. I don't even know
Which
what
is
that would
what
have
I
been.
don't remember. Yeah.
Journey to Italy,
Oh,
maybe? Did we
Journey,
have
yeah.
another
'Cause I remember
Italian movie?
the only two movies I remember doing while at Clump were Journey to Italy and Once Upon a Time in the West.
I remember discussing maybe doing Blade Runner.
Yeah. It's
Just
funny because I
'cause
just watched it a few weeks ago.
I did think it would be a funny bit back in my other room, how the window was in the background of that particular shot, and like photoshopping the Blade Runner, the Los Angeles skyline from Blade Runner into the background of the episode.
Would be a funny bit.
Could
would be
be
a very
could be
funny
a good
bit.
bit. Look, we can still do it. We still have to talk about Blade Runner at some point after our failed discussion.
It's lost media.
It is lost media. How many? Oh God, it's probably
It's
like
been years.
3 years since we recorded that.
Yeah. I can tell you because I remember. I guess that would have been the time before this latest that I logged Blade Runner on Letterboxd.
That was probably the last time I've watched it because I don't watch Blade Runner all that much. Bad movie.
November 2020, so a little over 3 years ago.
Only review I have for Blade Runner is asterisk with director commentary for November 30th, 2020. I couldn't tell you a single thing from that director commentary.
Was it? Yeah. I was about to say.
Oh, I watched it twice
Scott.
for that. I watched it on the 27th and the 30th. I'm just ignoring what we should be talking about right now. So I'm welcome to the Split Take podcast. I'm very excited today because we finally get to talk about one of my favorite filmmakers, Federico Fellini. And we're going to discuss, obviously, Chandler's a huge fan. And we're going to discuss Dune 2. So I'm going to leave a link somewhere, maybe in the description or wherever, to check out our Dune Part 1 and David Lynch's Dune review. I think that's our single longest episode that's not like a year in review episode. I think it's like 2.5 hours of us mostly just discussing
the good and bad and the ugly. Might have been longer.
Well, okay, but that's a special episode because we had Brenton on for that one.
That's true.
So
that's true.
In these arbitrary rules, our Dune episode is the longest run time we had discussing a single film, just the two of us. So hopefully we're not going to discuss Dune 2 all that much, and quite frankly,
we literally can't.
I mean, we could, but we won't. Both of us have discussed it previously together, so I feel like a lot of our conversation has already been had, so we will not have this desire to just keep rehashing talking points.
And one of us has seen it more times than the other. Won't say how many.
Probably as many times as the rest of our of the Jackie Boy Films crew put together.
That's true.
Almost.
Yeah, that
Maybe.
literally might be true. But did you beat Brenton?
No. Brenton is at 15 now, which is just insane.
So 146 times 15 divided by 60. He has spent 36.5 hours watching Dune, which is a day and a half.
And that's not even including the trailer time. Although he's been pretty good about arriving after the trailers, because the trailers before Dune 2, on the whole, with the exception of Furiosa, are just shit. Terrible selection of trailers.
Yes, somehow trailers have gotten worse after the Argyle trailer has been.
The Argyle trailer was just a great start to the year, and then it's gone downhill. And I'm not even judging the movies necessarily. I just like the Twister trailer. The movie could be perfectly adequate. I just hate the trailer specifically.
Yeah. Well, that's friend of the show, whatever the fuck his name is, who did Minari.
Oh, is it the same director?
Yep.
Oh,
that's
how little
Minari to Twisters.
Oh my god, what a jump! Oh, I almost feel bad for him. I wonder what the motivation was to do that. I'm not interested enough in Twisters to look into that.
You're not gonna see it? It has the girl from Normal People, Regular People, whatever the fuck it's called.
Regular People. I don't know why just the phrase regular people.
What is it called? It's called Normal People?
Normal people, yeah. Normal people.
Okay, yeah.
But I don't know, the phrase
people.
The phrase regular people makes it seem like it's a show about entirely abnormal people. Just not anyway. Uh, okay. Dune 2. Or I don't know. Is there any other new movies we want to briefly mention?
No.
Yeah, new. Monkey
God,
Man.
what did
We can do like rapid fire reviews.
Okay, sure.
Do
Let's
we
rapid
do we
fire
recommend
reviews.
it? 30 seconds.
Okay. First, Monkey Man.
Monkey Man. We've both seen this.
Yes.
Directorial debut for our boy Dev Patel of Green Knight fame.
Yep. A goodbye, Devlin Patel.
What'd you think of it?
I'm very excited for whatever Dev Patel makes next because it was very, very well directed. For the most part, it was just a script that was just so plotting and so boring and so, I don't know.
I don't know. He made a lot of big directorial choices, and I really appreciate that from like an initial film. And like he went big right out the gate, and that's great. Not all of it worked, but I'm much more inclined to enjoy or at least think back fondly on a film like Monkey Man that took those big risks. Didn't always pay off, but at least like I felt that Dev Patel was directing and not like other influences were too much in the driver's seat.
It's just the script is the big issue. Once he does a movie with a good script, I think it'll be great. He's a very talented director and a good choreographer.
I thought on the whole it was fun. It was worth a watch. It's not a bad time in the theater. It has its issues, but I guess I would recommend it if you're looking for something to see it in a theater.
I would agree.
Civil War.
Next.
I've seen it. You haven't.
Yes.
The least. We don't need to say anything about Civil War. I didn't care for it. There's so much dialogue on the internet. I don't really know what I could possibly add in 30 seconds to the divisive commentary. Big surprise, a movie like Civil War has divisive online commentary and reviews and opinions.
But that's the point.
Yeah. So I guess it succeeded in that regard. Okay, what else have you seen?
Real quick, Love Lies Bleeding, which if it wasn't for Perfect Days, would be my favorite of the year. I love Love Lies Bleeding. After going 0 for 2 with lesbian movies previously, both being Bottoms and Driveway Dolls, which are not very good, Love Lies Bleeding is very fucking good and really, really weird. And directed by the lady who did Saint Maud, which is another pretty good horror movie, but this one is very, very good. It kind of came and went. I don't know about this one because I'll be honest, I completely forgot about it, even though I really love it. I forgot it existed.
Interesting. It was in theaters, or at least the LA theaters, for a decent amount of time. I tried to see it last week, and stuff came up that I wasn't able to see.
Was it still playing last week?
Yeah.
Damn, that's
one
crazy.
of the like Burbank 8, one of the Burbanks.
Okay. Yeah, damn, it is still playing at AMC. That's
is
crazy.
it? Oh,
yep.
I do still want to
8.
try to catch it at some point. So if it's still in theaters this weekend, I might give it a shot.
It's very good.
So I've heard. I watched the Netflix miniseries Ripley, which is based on the novel The Talented Mr. Ripley. There's also a film, which I watched as well, which I had never seen before. The
great
new
Philip Seymour Hoffman performance.
Aren't they all?
Literally every single.
I'm trying to think of a bad Philip Seymour Hoffman performance, and doesn't exist. I mean, as much as I don't like The Master, it's a fantastic performance. You cannot deny that. Anyway, Ripley, it's from what I've heard, it's much more faithful to the novel. It's black and white, set in 1960s Italy. It is bursting with atmosphere and with kind of this noir vibes. It's very slow. If you can get past the first 2 episodes, which were entirely uninvolving on like an emotional or character level for me, it got more interesting on a narrative kind of thriller level after that. I would have liked more character-wise from everyone across the board, including Andrew Scott playing Tom Ripley, which is probably my biggest issue with it. Is by like the end of 8 hours of television, essentially an 8-hour movie, I feel like I should have gotten to know these people and seen them in more like character driven situations more. But with that aside, it was on the whole a decent experience. So
That's pretty much it for me as far as like what came out this year.
yeah, there's not much so far.
I would like to give a quick shout out to a little short film called The Last Brunch, directed by Jim Cummings. I thought it was very, very funny. He's back to doing shorts because I guess, I don't know why, but he tweeted like a first however many people that respond to this tweet get a private Vimeo link to his short. And I was one of them, and I watched it, and it was very, very funny. That's it.
That's very cool. So now we're going to talk about the actual best movie of the year, despite Chandler's little love for Love Lies Bleeding.
Yeah, it might be better than Love Lies Bleeding. It probably is.
Well, I'm not.
I forgot about Dune. I'll be honest.
Look, you can have your unique opinions. That's why
it's not better than Perfect Days.
I'll need to ruminate on that thought, but I couldn't say at the moment.
Dune 2 doesn't have toilets.
This is true.
Toilet.
Most movies could be improved by having a toilet somewhere involved.
That's what got Alfred Hitchcock famous.
Sure, but I'm not sure it would work for every director.
True.
It's kind of a one trick pony sort of deal. Anyway, Dune 2, it's the sequel to Dune Part 1, directed by Denis Villeneuve. Oh, I'm getting a call. It's starring Timothée Chalamet and Rebecca Ferguson and Zendaya. Who?
The Worm.
Oh, they said Thor for a second. Just the distortion over the internet apparently made me hear that. Okay, bunch of people you know. It's Dune 2. I feel like we're definitely late to the game reviewing this on April 24th in the year of our Lord 2024.
Well, some of us had to see it 10 times to let it really ruminate.
Well, some of us had to wait a whole month before seeing it, and some of us had to watch it again and again and again and again. Chandler, what did you think of Dune Part 2?
Dune Part 2 is a very, very good movie. And you know what? I'll be honest. Because by the time that I saw it, you had seen it, 7-8 times?
I think it was the 7th time.
And then maybe like an hour into it, I was just like, I can't imagine seeing this multiple times. Because I'm like, it's long, it's good, but it is long. But that last hour, I was like, damn, I got to see it again. I haven't yet.
That's interesting. Every time I rewatch it, I'm just giddy for the first hour. That's the part I look forward to watching the most. And then now that I'm saying that, I also look forward to watching the end the most as well. So it's a weird feeling because I don't think I've never watched a movie this much in such a short time frame before. I've come close with Parasite and Paddington 2, both of which are eminently rewatchable. Both are the most watched films on my Letterboxd currently. Soon to not be the case anymore, but that's something for another time. But I think both of those, with Paddington 2 and Parasite, those I watched over 6 months, a total of 10 times. This I've met 9 times in the span of essentially a month and change. And so it's certainly a different way of interacting with a movie that I've ever done before, and it's not really lost any of its luster. It is a capital C cinematic experience, and that certainly helps.
I remember when we went to go see it, you were worried that this would be the time that it lost its luster, and since then you've seen it 2 more times.
Yes, 2 more times since then, and it has not every time is as euphoric as the first time or whatever.
What movie could you see that many times where each time would be as euphoric? I don't think there's any of them.
I'll let you in on a little secret. The Devil's Lettuce helps.
Fair.
With fair eliciting some a more kind of immediate emotional reaction that isn't quite possible after you've seen something so many times.
Which there's nothing better than partaking in the Devil's Lettuce with a movie you've seen many times, where it's not about feeling it, it's more about you see every atom of the movie and you love every atom.
And I do love every atom of this movie. If it wasn't already clear by the fact that I've seen it 9 times, I freaking adore this movie. And
Also, it's what somewhere in your top 10, 15 at this point.
yeah, I've given up trying uh, to keep it off my top 10. I don't know. I've
It's all
always
subjective.
it is. Although I've always subscribed to the idea that like you shouldn't jump to conclusions about movies, especially movies that are new and that are kind of like yeah, you can kind of get swept away by the hype of everything. And so I typically like to wait and savor a film for a little bit before it makes its way anywhere close to my top 10. I think this is also the case for like the BFI, the Sight and Sound list. I think on the whole, a lot of the movies on there are older, and so the list also kind of adheres to that principle of like letting things kind of grow and see how they respond to over time, and not just in the immediate in the present. So I tend to follow that rule, but I ended up breaking it because if again, like if I'm watching it this many times, if I'm enjoying it this much, and I'm getting this much out of it, why why adhere to this arbitrary distinction of letting it linger?
See, I understand that frame of mind, but I do the same thing, but with like a different aim. Where something like I'll watch a movie like The Holdovers or Fallen Leaves or Perfect Days, and I'll have such a strong reaction that I'm like, I'm going to give it a 5 now. Let's see how I feel the next time. And for some movies, like The Holdovers or like Fallen Leaves, when I see it a second time, I'm like, not as good. Still very good, but I bump it down a little bit, and that's just as interesting to me as seeing the estimation rise over time. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's maybe this is the new trend, but every 20 years you just get this sort of like cinematic cultural moment. Because I feel like what's happening right now with Dune, which again, Dune of all things, which a few 2 or 3 years ago, I would not have believed you if you were to if you were to show me the Paul Atreides edits.
Well, I feel like it kind of is in line with a lot of the big cultural zeitgeist things, including the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which those are all based on comics, which are decades old,
Yes, but
and they weren't
like
necessarily like cool for the longest time, and they suddenly came back and became cool and culturally relevant.
yes, but I mean that like there's that combination of them being both like cultural achievements and cinematic achievements. The
So
Marvel movies are cultural, but they are not cinematic achievements.
I pulled Marvel as the first example, but we can also I feel like this also applies to Lord of the Rings, obviously, a book a book series that was
book
old.
series book series that was had a reputation for being unfilmable.
Yeah, been around
Given
for a
well,
long
Lord of the
time.
Rings,
It's
yeah,
like the fantasy kind of series, and Dune obviously is like the sci-fi series. Obviously, there are others, but this is one of like
yeah, yeah,
the big
the
foundational
biggest,
novels.
yeah. But yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like 20 years before this, it was Lord of the Rings. 20 years before that was Star Wars. It just feels like, especially in an age where you're getting to the tail end of the MCU, where you're just thinking, God, are we ever going to get like good big budget movies again? Like this big of budget, this good and this big of budget. Usually it's one or the other. Uh, you get movies like I think the Batman was also very very good
Yeah.
for relative to its budget. One of those that you look at it and you're like, how did they make this? I forgot movies could look this good,
Hmm.
but it doesn't necessarily land the narrative as well as like the Dune movies do. But it's just I don't know. It's very rarely that I'm in a movie in a theater going just like I have no fucking clue how he even did this. The magic of the movies is back, especially at like the beginning. The first moment I had thought about this was in the opening scene raid where the Harkonnens are like fighting the Fremen in the desert. There's just that little clip that everyone's been posting of just the Harkonnens floating, which I'm like, yeah, I in retrospect, I guess it could be wires. I don't know.
Wires, green screen work. Yeah. I
Yeah.
feel like it's all fairly low tech cinema stuff, but it's just been repurposed and done in a way that you haven't quite seen in a while.
Because I feel like every big movie the last like 5 or 6 years would just be like, okay, CGI model, have them float. But
Right.
like, no, Denis Villeneuve was up on some fucking mountain in the middle of nowhere
In
with those
Jordan. But
guys
yeah.
in the big suits. Where?
Jordan, same place they
Jordan.
filmed Lawrence of Arabia.
Oh, okay. Well, still, they set up wires in Jordan, which I'm like, oh,
They didn't have wires in Jordan before this. They had
they
to
have this
import
is the first
wire.
time wires have been into Jordan.
Yes.
Which again, the crazy part to me is that like you don't see that a lot anymore.
Mhm.
Because in your mind, I'm sure there's a bunch of people who make excuses for like it's too hard or too expensive. But then you look at the budget of Dune 2, and you're like, this is $100 million less expensive than Captain Marvel, the new one. And you're just
And
like,
it looks $100 million more expensive, despite
it-
being less expensive.
yeah,
It's a miracle. It's a miracle of filmmaking. The fact that we have it, and part of it is like I just wasn't, maybe I wasn't ready to accept the miracle that was Dune 2, because I had this weird reaction to it the first time in that I didn't know what to make of it. I kind of came out of the theater just feeling overwhelmed by it, and it is an overwhelming experience, particularly like
it's a
depending on the
lot.
theater you go to. Uh, I ended up going to the Burbank 16 IMAX in Burbank uh, for that first one, and then I also routinely saw it at the IMAX in 70 millimeter at the Universal AMC. And there is a huge sound difference between those two theaters. The Universal Theater, which I thought was going to be the louder of the two, was actually the quieter and um, the better tuned theater.
I would agree.
It was perfect. It was like, it was loud, it was immersive, but it wasn't annoying and grating. The Burbank Theater, I enjoyed the experience, but it was overwhelming. There's a scene where when we're first introduced to Gurney Halleck, and there's a moment when he's uh when the spice factory is just like firing up, and it starts like rumbling, and there's a shot of him walking through the desert, and the sand is vibrating with the rumbling factory behind him, and the soundtrack is just like almost pure bass. It's just completely rumbling auditory, just an auditory surround. And in the Burbank Theater, it is almost painful to listen to for the
I remember
15,
feeling
20
that way
seconds.
when we saw Mission Impossible,
Mm,
and that was a movie that was similarly big, but not as visceral, I guess. But yes,
yeah.
it does have a good effect.
I enjoyed the loudness of that, but especially on that first viewing, it was overwhelming, both in an auditory sense, but also like visually, and also someone who has read the book multiple times is familiar with it. They made a lot of changes. Denis made a lot of changes from the novel, um, and I wasn't quite sure what to make of that. So the first viewing was kind of like this tug of war between my expectations, both expectations that I had created myself after watching part one, and expectations after reading the book. And then the second time, well, also add on to that, Denis has this way of filming that his narrative doesn't provide you any crutches. He just goes. It's off to the races. Doesn't bother explaining most things. Just keeps the narrative just like
Which in
powers forward.
retrospect is the better way to go, especially with something as like dense
Mm,
lore wise as Dune.
100%.
Yeah.
And but that just also adds to the, it's a lot to take in on that first viewing. And it wasn't until the second viewing when I had, okay, I had the narrative unpacked, I could just kind of experience it for what it was, that I actually was like, okay, this is pretty good.
And again, we talked about just that feeling of being like, how did you do this? I feel like that was very rarely do movies these days just transport me to a different place. But as soon as they cut to Getty Prime and we're seeing Austin Butler of Elvis fame fighting some drugged up Atreides soldiers, It's one of those few times in recent movie history where I'm just like, I feel like I'm witnessing the birth of like new iconic iconography.
Hmm.
And again, it's like there have been very good movies in the past. I guess the last time I felt that I was watching an instant classic was maybe Parasite, because there have been movies that I've liked more than Parasite. But there's a difference between stuff that I love and stuff that like immediately ingrains itself into the culture, the cinematic landscape. And even more rare is one of those movies a big budget Hollywood blockbuster. Because I grew up, I know a lot of people grew up. A lot of people who aspire to be filmmakers grew up watching stuff like Spielberg, Lucas. I never cared for any of that. Not that
Hmm.
I don't like it, but I never grew up thinking like that's what I wanted to do. That's something that was tangible to me, because it was just always so like, you know, so expensive, so unconnected to what I'd been seeing currently. But like that was one of the first movies in a long time where I'm like, oh, there's probably a 13-year-old right here in this audience whose entire life is going to be changed seeing this movie in a theater, which is a increasingly rare thing. And get a lot more Harkonnens, which is my big complaint of Dune 1. Not enough Baron, not enough Raban. Get a lot of Harkonnens in this one.
I had a true month of Dune in March, because it wasn't just watching Dune Part Two all those times. I also took the time to rewatch Dune Part One and David Lynch's Dune. And I will just say briefly about those two movies. David Lynch's Dune, I enjoyed it a lot more this particular go around. Still not good, uh, but it just, I don't know, the pacing. I guess one of my bigger complaints when we talked about it was just like it's just kind of boring with all the exposition and there's nothing to like latch onto. But maybe it's just because I now have the full Denis Villeneuve version of Dune, and I had reread the book, so I had more to engage with in terms of like comparing and contrasting. But it just like it flowed better, not in a good way. Like the film, it didn't have good flow. It just like my experience of it flowed better. Um, Still a wacky, wild, out there movie, which is just utter nonsense. I love it. It's not good, but I do like it. I think I do end up.
But movies don't have to be good.
No, they don't. No, they don't. Dune Part One. Damn, that's a good movie. It's a good movie. I know we have our disagreement about Dune Part One. I think it gets better in retrospect, especially after watching Dune Part Two. Because one of the biggest issues I had with Dune Part One, and the interesting thing is like it's it's not as obviously uh well constructed through its entire runtime. It has its ebbs and flows in terms of its quality, but especially near the end where they're in the desert, that can tend to drag on. Sometimes I watch it and I'm like, this goes by just fine. I have no issues with this. And other times I'll watch it and like, okay, get on with it. This most recent time, I found it much more engaging because I had the context of where it was going, and it felt like it was building to something rather than stalling out. And I think
Mm.
if you were to watch both back to back, which I intend to do at some point soon, it would be a very rewarding experience because of how long it takes to actually get to the Fremen. That
Yeah.
kind of build up. It's also kind of like in the novel as well. It takes Paul and Jessica so long to find the Fremen. You don't want it to just be like this easy thing. Arrakis is supposed to be this death trap of a planet,
Mm.
and they shouldn't just stumble upon it. It should like take its time. They should essentially get lost in the magnitude of the desert. And so I feel like that was effectively communicated. Sometimes it doesn't work because of just the nature of what it is, but I think in the context of the whole, it works much better.
And I would agree too, because a big problem that I had with part one at the time was that I wanted more Stilgar. I felt like the Fremen were kind of sidelined, but I guess that is the point, because part one is supposed to set up this sort of like global context in which Arrakis exists. And now that I've seen part two, and I love Stilgar even more, and Zendaya is actually, or Chani is actually a much more fleshed out character. I think those little bits in part 1. Now that I know those characters a lot better, will retroactively be more interesting. Because when you're watching it, having not seen part 2, you're just like, okay, we're spending a lot of time with these characters that we didn't get introduced really until the very end. But maybe I'm not saying that was his plan all along, because he didn't even know he was going to make part 2 by the time he was
Right.
making part 1. But I do think in retrospect, it does make it better. And something like this that's so it's the same issue I have with Lord of the Rings. It's like virtually impossible to see every movie as its own thing. It's all one big story. To rate it all as like piece, it feels like futile. So if I could retroactively go back, I guess I can get rid of both my ratings for Dune 1 and 2. Doesn't matter, because the entirety of the Dune story is a perfect 5 out of 5 movie.
And 5 out of 5, 5-hour film.
Exactly. Same with Lord of the Rings. It's a 5 out of 5, 12-hour movie.
Yes.
Like, you could say the Two Towers is the worst, but am I ever just going to be like, I'm not going to watch the Two Towers. I'm going straight from Fellowship to Return of the... No.
Like, no.
Because it's all part of...
It's not even bad.
No, it's not. It's just you have to pick a worst one of the 3.
Well, you don't have to, but you could.
Well, you're right. I guess we don't have to. That's why I don't have any of the Lord of the Rings movies privately rated. They're all the greatest movie of all time. Dune gets that as well. However, if they land the finale, then we'll have to see how it ranks compared to Lord of the Rings. I'll tell you this much. 2 movies in, it's already better than the original Star Wars trilogy.
It's
maybe. I guess I don't know.
That's one of the things that I'm hemming and hawing over in my my top 10 currently is do I like it more than Empire Strikes Back? And the problem is that like Empire has a lifetime of nostalgia and love built behind it. And so Dune Part 2 has a big mountain to climb. But I'm not.
But the book,
but
you
I'm
have
not
more
sure.
familiarity with the book.
Yes. And I'm going to preface this. I think it will climb that mountain. I think we might get to the point where it'll jump that, but I'm not quite ready to put it above there.
Well, you have the rest of your life to decide that.
I do. And I have the rest of my life to keep changing my mind, going back and forth.
This is true.
Which I do.
Who knows? Maybe 50 years from now, you'll unapologetically think the prequels are the best trilogy of all time.
So I don't know if you noticed, I rewatched Attack of the Clones recently on 420. Nate and I did a truly cursed double feature of A Hard Day's Night, which is just great. Just a delightful film. It has lost none of it's
a fun movie.
Yes. Just a good time. Attack the Clones, I think this time around, I'm just losing my interest in Star Wars. Finally, I've had this. I know. I'm kind of happy. I've had this tradition of rewatching the prequels every year, just as like a punishment of penance, for my younger cringy
keep you
self.
humble.
Yes, and I think finally, every year I kind of look forward to it. Like, oh, these are fun. They're bad, but I enjoy how bad they are. It was just a sense of apathy throughout the runtime. I found it more entertaining, ironically, as a result.
Okay.
But it was just like, I guess I just don't care.
Well, that's the other thing I thought about watching Dune, where I just halfway through, I'm like, are we done with Star Wars now? is there a societal need for Star Wars?
That might also
full circle?
Be the case. Plenty of people have already said this, but it is true that like Dune has officially shown up Disney Star Wars in terms of quality, and there is no excuse now for the Disney Star Wars to be as bad as it is, because it's essentially Star Wars. As like
similar stories.
They're similar stories. George stole tons of ideas from Dune, which is great, as he should. Stealing ideas is an important part of film and literature and everything.
And he added samurais to it, which is cool.
Yes, great things. But at this point, with Disney being in the driver's seat, they should take notes from Dune. I fear that they'll take the wrong notes, as they always do. You know, the classic. I feel like the example I always go to is the Dark Knight, and every film after the Dark Knight had to be dark and gritty, and I was like, that wasn't the lesson you should have learned from that. The lesson
Bob
should just be make good movies.
Bob Iger's got himself like one of those giant notepads that flips over, and he just presents it to the boardroom. I saw Dune Part 2. My takeaway: our villains need to be fat and bald.
Fat and bald, and
Sith Lords have to be fat and bald and gay.
I want the audience to have ear problems after coming out of the theater. I also finally got around to reading Dune Messiah, which is an amazing book. I know it's kind of divisive in the Dune community, but I think it is a really interesting follow-up to Dune because it is so different as a novel.
Because it finally introduces Hitler into the Dune cinematic universe.
This is true. Yes, Hitler is mentioned. Spoiler alerts. But
Which
it
will be incredibly funny if somehow Denis Villeneuve brings Hitler into
that would be funny.
Dune Part 3.
I mean, it is always kind of funny in Dune Part 1 seeing the bagpipes. It's just like this weird, incongruous moment to remind you that this is our future that this is set in, not just some other. Because I feel like for the most part, you can kind of ignore the fact that this is set in a future timeline.
Yeah.
Anyway, Dune Messiah, it is a completely different book stylistically and genre from Dune. And I am almost giddy with the prospect of Denis adapting it, and I feel like there's going to be like a bunch of raging fanboys who hate it because it is not what they want after Dune Part 2, which is this kind of sprawling epic action film. And Dune Messiah is a internal psychological thriller that is depressing, and it is wonderful, and I can't wait, but it is a very different beast to adapt than Dune. Easier. It's a much easier book to adapt. It's a small, slim little novel.
Yeah.
So I have every confidence in the world that Denis can do it. Whether it's going to be as good as Dune Part 2, I don't know. But I think it has the potential to be. But it will be different.
Are we moving on to La Dolce Vita? Because I got to pee.
Sure. We can move on.
Okay. Dune Part 2. Very, very good.
It's great. Yes, we could keep talking about it. We're not.
I would say see it in theaters. If you don't live in LA, I feel like, I don't know if that'll be the case, but I feel like it's going to pop up a bunch more times throughout the year.
Still is in theaters, and it will most certainly be back in theaters whenever Messiah comes out.
Yeah. When it wins.
3
Oh,
years.
are we locking in Dune Part 2 Best Picture?
Oh, well, Best Picture? Oh, I don't know. Certainly, I'm already. I think I tweeted about this, or I saved the information somewhere. It's a shoe-in for Best Cinematography, Best Sound.
Would be incredibly funny if this is what Austin Butler won an Oscar for.
He's not going to win an Oscar for it. Look, it's good, but it's not an Oscar-worthy performance.
I think it is.
When I say Oscar-worthy, I mean Dune is not the kind of movie the Oscars award acting trophies.
That's
for.
True. That's true.
Not that I'm taking my opinion out of this. I'm just saying they're not going to even nominate anyone for an acting award in Dune.
Not even Christopher Walken.
Nope.
For his delivery of the word Muad'Dib.
Look, I also have to say, Christopher Walken, I like him as the Emperor. Wasn't sure what to feel.
He's good.
First.
He's a good Emperor.
Yeah.
I don't know if, I'm sure there's other people that could be just as stoic, but something about his face where I see it, I'm like, yeah, you should be in space. That's a face that has traveled the galaxies. That has seen the stars up close. Go what, Pete?
Yeah, go Pete. If you keep sitting here, I'll keep talking about Dune. We have to stop the conversation at some point.
We have to.
This is a good place to a good reason to stop. Right? I could just keep talking while you're gone. Keep talking about how beautiful the movie is, how fucking amazing it is. I think I have a deep love and appreciation of religious themes in movies, and movies that explore that from both as like from like a faithful and a doubtful perspective. Thinking of Martin Scorsese's Silence as an interesting example, and of course, almost all of Ingmar Bergman's filmography. But this certainly explores faith in a way that I don't think modern or any blockbuster really has ever done in a convincing way. Faith, religion, fanaticism, great great themes, a lot of stuff to think about. One of the interesting things I find about the movie is that every time I watch it, I think you can read Paul's motivations slightly differently. I think there's a way you can read Paul manipulating the Fremen from the very beginning, and then I also think there's a way you can read it as Paul kind of is genuine in his attempts to avoid his destiny of taking control of the Fremen. That is far that there that for a time he puts that out of his mind because of Chani and his love for Chani. And um, yeah, so I think you can read it both ways. I think you can kind of read it as he's always kind of manipulating and using religion to his advantage, or you can read him as a bit more genuine, which makes it kind of more tragic. In my initial viewing, I thought some of the like the character choices, there was changes within Paul and within Jessica that felt a little too abrupt. But I think on rewatches, the Denis very subtly did all of that stuff throughout the film.
What?
I've just been talking about Dune this whole time
Oh,
to the camera.
awesome.
I don't know how much I'm going
Wonderful.
to keep of that, but just rambling.
Now for the real movie.
Now for the real cinema, actually, though. As excellent as I think Dune Part 2 is, and as monumental of an achievement I think it is, I do still adhere to the you gotta let films sit, you gotta let them cook, you gotta let them age like fine wine before you can call them the best quote unquote of any particular genre or
Yeah.
whatever. La Dolce Vita is a movie that has had plenty of time to age like a fine wine, like a fine Italian wine in a barrel. Um, and so we'll talk about that. This is obviously our next installment of our trip through the 2012 Sight and Sound list. Obviously, they have since released the 2022 list, but we're sticking with the 2012 list because we didn't get through that. I don't have it up here at the moment, so I'm not exactly sure where it is on the list, but that's okay. La Dolce Vita. It is a movie directed by Federico Fellini from 1960. It is a comedy, drama, tragedy, satire.
All of it.
It's an epic. It's many things. I don't really know of any movie quite like La Dolce Vita, which I feel is appropriate for a Fellini film. Um, it it is a piece of film history. It had a huge reaction to it when it came out. It was scandalous. There are a lot of scandalous things that are very tame by modern standards, but in the 1960s, all of the debauchery and the sex and the sweet life, as it is called, um, scandalized people. And I feel like the Vatican banned it or something. That seems
Probably.
or
It seems
maybe they liked it.
appropriate.
I don't know. They had a complicated relationship with Fellini, as did Fellini had a complicated relationship with the Catholic Church. It won Oscars, Academy Awards.
Did it win? What Academy Awards did it win?
It won the
Foreign
Palme
movie?
d'Or at the Cannes. It won the Academy Award for Best Costumes. Very interesting. It was nominated for Best Director and Best Original Screenplay. Didn't win.
Damn. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know the history of the Oscars in nominating foreign language movies. I know obviously they have their own category now, and obviously there's a few movies every year that sort of like are able to break through into the English categories. But I don't know how the landscape was in 1960.
I think for the most part, the foreign language films breaking into like the Best Picture category, that's a recent phenomenon. I think for the most part, they kept them separate. We were less accepting of foreign films in our Best Picture category earlier. Uh, yeah, so I have seen La Dolce Vita a few times at this point, and this was Chandler's first viewing of the film. So I'm gonna hand it off to him and ask the all important question: What did you think?
Well, I guess a quick little precursor to this is that the only movie I'd seen of Fellini's before this was Eight and a Half, the movie that when I saw it for the first time 5 or 6 years ago, I did not care for. Didn't hate it, but didn't care for it. Then we watched it again recently, very recently, within the last year or so. We caught a screening of it at the New Beverly. My opinions, oddly enough, did not change, which is rare because most of my opinions pre like 2020 have gone through radical changes. Most movies that I thought were back then, I love now. Eight and a half, I felt the exact same way. We could blame some of that on the circumstances in which we saw it, which the subtitles were cut off and we couldn't really read them. Whatever.
It was also just a weird subtitle translation track.
Yes, it was fucking Tarantino and his old prints. I don't know how old that print was, but point is, went into this thinking maybe Fellini's just not my guy. Everybody's awarded one of those guys that you just don't get. Jacob's is Sam Raimi. Mine is Fellini. But watching this one, I very much enjoyed it, and I would say it's a masterpiece. And it makes me want to revisit Eight and a Half, but I think my issues with Eight and a Half will persist.
My recommendation to you, one, wonderful. Two, my recommendation is explore some more Fellini before you return to eight and a half.
Yes, I want to do Amarcord.
Well, Amarcord, Dula Strada, Knights of Cabiria. I would like Fellini has, I think, one of the most interesting filmographies because there is a clear arc to his films. There's a narrative through line throughout his whole career that is, I think, not really present in most directors. Like if you look at Ingmar Bergman's filmography, there are so many movies, but like the beginning of his career is much the same as close to the end of his career, except for Fan and Alexander. He got a little more sentimental towards the end, but for the most part, he remained the same as a director. So did Alfred Hitchcock. Directors usually like sometimes like the quality changes. Like Spielberg hasn't had a lot of great movies lately, but I don't think you could really say like there's been an arc. Although I think you could say that there's been earlier on in his career he was more uh, adventurous, kind of darker with his films, willing to take bigger risks, and he's become a little more safe as he's gone on. But Fellini, there is a just a very interesting pathway that you can clearly track throughout his movies that I don't really have any other director that I can really compare it to, because he started his career working on uh neorealist movies. He worked with Rossellini and did scripts for Rossellini on a few of his neorealist movies. And he started his career very much with like a foot within neorealism and a foot in his own style. And then over time, that kind of his own style kind of took more and more control, but it still was very like grounded and realistic. And then La Dolce Vita came around, and he finally had the budget and the creative freedom to just go all out with his imagination. And then obviously after that, he went even wilder with eight and a half, and then it gets utterly absurd after eight and a half. Like if you think eight and a half is a surrealist piece of nonsense, it's truly.
You could even argue that someone who had a somewhat similar trajectory was Kurosawa. If you compare like Kagemusha and Dreams to like,
yeah,
I don't know, he got increasingly more epic, more colorful. He adapted to the changing form, but like the heel turn of Fellini from just like boring Italian drama to just full on fever dream of sin is pretty interesting.
Which it's not boring. Ironically, I find his earlier movies better on the whole. I don't really care for his later work. They're interesting, but they're wild. And I feel like Fellini is at his best at La Dolce Vita and eight and a half. Like he had this 2 movie streak of at like the peak of his game before he went too far off the rails and before he left neorealism behind completely. So it's like this perfect middle ground where it's one foot in surrealism and one foot in neorealism. And I feel like that works perfectly. And La Dolce Vita kind of bringing the conversation back to this particular film, um, is it is a delightful film.
It is weirdly enough for a 3-hour movie. It has like these weird little hangout set pieces that you never really get the sense that it's building towards anything. Like maybe internally it's building, but like we're just kind of drifting, and the aimlessness of one scene to the next is like baked into what this whole movie is about, which is this guy who is chasing a feeling I think he's incapable of having anymore, whether it be age, whether it be uh his just complete apathy towards his job or whatever. I don't know, but it's about a sad man who just he's partied a little too hard. He's numb to the luxuries of the world.
And that's kind of the irony of the title, Dolce Vita, the sweet life, is that there's a lot to like about the life that he leads, the life of the rich and famous in Rome. But there is a lot of darkness and sadness to that life as well. I feel like it's a movie filled with entertainments of stars and of parties and everything, but there's this almost like dark black heart at the center of it that's just like just under the surface. It's not quite ever like it doesn't, well, it does later on become explicit, but there is this kind of emptiness, this nihilism that's just waiting behind every corner at all these parties, at all these entertainments, all these whenever he's looking for love or whatever. That's what makes it so interesting, I feel like, for me.
Well, another thing too is that this idea that we sort of like we're looking at all of these things that we aspire to in our lives through the lens of media, through movies, print journalism, music, whatever. But he's a guy who's just on the front lines of all of it. So he's meeting the movie stars, he's attending the premieres, he's going to these parties, he's hearing all this music, and it's his whole fucking life where he starts to understand that this is all just an illusion. It's nothing. At the heart of this, it's nothing. At the heart of this is just like idiots and regular people, and just like he just hates everyone, not explicitly, but he's just Marstrella. What's his name? Marcello Mastriani.
Marcello Mastroianni.
Marcello Mastriani just has the most like ennui-ridden face of any actor. That's a man who's just dead behind his eyes.
Well, I feel like it's a classic story of disillusionment because at the beginning he's there's still life there in his eyes, and I think it's one of the great things about La Dolce Vita is the universality of its story. Um, in that it's very specific to the time and place, to post-war Italy that's going through an economic boom and is also in the 60s of like kind of like the sexual revolution and everything. Like there's a lot to specifically root it in the time and place that it takes place in. But there is this undercurrent of the archetypal story of someone from a small town, because it is alluded to briefly that he comes from a small town and he moved to Rome to try and find like the high life. Um, and I feel like that can kind of be echoed in our story of moving from small town or smallish towns in Arizona to the big city, Los Angeles, to try to make it big in an industry, and eventually getting disillusioned with that particular way of life, which is a tale as old as time.
Yep. Another thing I just find interesting is that it's you have all these like at the time modern things, cars, clothing, people, cultures, parties, all of this happening in like just the middle of Rome, one of the most ancient cities of all times, where it further emphasizes this idea that this is will always be there. This disillusionment, this sort of like erosion of culture is just like a part of the human cycle. It's just so weird to see like these sports cars driving next to like coliseums and old architecture that dates back hundreds and hundreds of years. It uses like the sort of uh the the antiquated look of Europe in a way that I feel like not a lot of other European filmmakers at this time did. Because you look at like France and something about France and like Godard movies and Truffaut movies, it still feels like a modern city.
Mhm.
But like you look at the way Fellini captures like the landscapes, and you're like, people shouldn't live here. What are you still doing in Rome?
But that's also that's specific kind of to Rome in a way. Obviously, like I'm sure you could film Paris in a way that makes it seem a little older than it is, but Rome in particular has more so than I think most other major European cities kept its old look. It still has that kind of vibe. It hasn't like the outskirts of Rome, and we see those outskirts being built in this movie. Again, another thing that kind of like puts it in a specific time and place of all these like new modernist apartment buildings that are going up on the outskirts of Rome. But for the most part, the center of Rome, where a large part of the film takes place, is like it's the same. It's unchanged, and even I feel like the new buildings that are going up there are still the same style. They kind of keep it very ancient. It's called the Eternal City for a reason. I mean, it still looks like it's kind of classical Renaissance slash Roman era. It's great.
Another thing too is that just over the course of the movie, that first party scene where you have that man who looks like a statue. I remember
I
seeing that and being like, "Oh my god, this is wild."
I think it's
But
because he's an American playing a Roman in a movie. I feel like it's not really explicitly said, but I gather that, and so his
yeah,
getup is meant to make him look Roman-ish.
which is it makes him look like a cartoon. Which again doesn't matter because you're like, okay, sure, Italian party. Yeah, they're just guys that look like statues. That's just when in Rome, literally when in Rome. But that first party scene, because there's multiple party scenes.
I think there's four.
That first party scene has so much life to it where you're just like every other scene is just some weird wacky new thing that's joining the party making it more fun. But by the time you get to the third party scene, there's like a part of you that's just like, oh, we're doing another party scene. But then you're also like, yeah, that's his whole fucking life is these parties that suck.
Yeah, that's part of the very subtle narrative trajectory of the film because again, it is very episodic. There's not really a strong narrative through line, but there is this slow, inexorable descent into disillusionment. Part of it is that the party, because you have that first one, the party with the Sylvia, the actress. It's just filled with life, with music, and with dancing, and there's a spontaneity to it that is never really quite captured again in the movie. And I feel like that is the closest the film ever gets to like this is the sweet life. This is La Dolce Vita that
Yes.
Fellini is talking about. It's an illusion at the end of the day, but this is the embodiment of it. And then the next party you have is Steiner's party, more like a house party, more of kind of like this European intellectual party
Which
of
that that feels more like wine and cheese sort of rubbing elbows with professor types. But like that's where the darkness comes in because you see how fucking miserable this guy is. And then that's the thing watching this movie. Spoiler alert, but I was watching it and I just like the way that he's looking at his kids at the end. I'm like, God, if this is a movie made today, he'd fucking kill his kids. And then hey, look what happens. He kills his kids and himself.
oh, I think the Steiner storyline is the most depressing thing Fellini put on film by a mile.
Oh
Maybe
my
La
god.
Strada might come close.
How
But
could
in
that movie be depressing? It's about clowns. Clowns are happy.
well, I won't go
I
into
know, I'm
that.
just kidding.
I'll let you discover that on your own. But it's part of it is that Fellini is, I think, at his core, he's a hopeful person. He's a person who finds the joy of life. He loves life, and that comes through in almost all of his movies. But the Steiner stuff is, I think, the most nihilistic he ever gets, and in his films. And I don't think the movie ever recovers from that. Again, spoiler alert. Steiner kills himself. Well, kills his children, and he kills himself. And the movie never recovers. He never the end of the movie never really regains this kind of hope there's not like this upbeat ending. There is this kind of the ending's interesting, and I'll let
Yes.
you
Well,
comment on
there's
that.
like a part of me that when I saw that, I'm like, oh, is this going to be what inspires him to finally be like, you know what? I love my wife. No. He doubles down.
Well, because Steiner represented what he thought he wanted from life and
Yes.
thought what was going to lead to happiness, and then that was like, oh well, clearly this is not a good life to lead. And so he just kind of he again, like you said, doubles down on just the carefree
Which,
party
yeah.
lifestyle.
But I feel like the most affecting scene in the entire movie for me, aside from the ending, which we'll talk about, but the just that little 20-25 minute chapter of the movie where he's just with his dad. Where again, any other movie would be like, oh, I should look towards my dad for inspiration on how to live. But then like we spend time with him and you're like, oh, he's also fucking depressed. Everyone in Rome is depressed and doesn't want to be who they are. And that because like that's like I feel like the only time in the movie that you see a little bit of vulnerability, a little bit of humanity
Yeah.
from Marcello, where he's like desperately trying to connect with his father, who at the end of the day is just like apathetic towards his own son as he is towards everyone. So it's this never ending cycle of Italian apathy that just keeps spiraling.
And another reason why I love that sequence is when they're at the nightclub. A common motif in Fellini films is, of course, clowns, and he sneaks in his clown for La Dolce Vita at the nightclub with his little trumpet and balloon
Great clown.
scene, which is a great clown. Yeah.
Great clown. That's party scene number 3.
Yes.
Okay. So it's
Sylvia,
statue party,
Steiner.
Steiner, French girl who flirts with his dad, and then my
The
favorite party, which again
no.
brings
Oh, there's
what-
five. There's five parties because
oh
then
where's the
there's the castle with all
oh I
the
guess that
the
counts as a
prince,
party.
and
That's
that
true.
one is entirely like no one knows who anyone is. That's
Yes,
the most lifeless party that there
which
is. It's just rich
it
people standing around in a room.
again going into this, one of the other few things I knew was that the singer Nico was in it from the Velvet Underground, and once she appears, I'm like, oh, it's just another pretty blonde woman. Which, in the context of the movie, you're like, oh, this is another fucking day in his life. But I like her little night helmet that she wears.
Mhm.
That's
And
fun.
like it is fun when they do go to the old part of the house that they have this kind of like almost ghost story. He gets his seance in for the film, another classic Fellini thing,
Oh
into
yeah,
spirits and
stupid.
stuff. Um, so there's a little bit of life in that party when they end up going checking out this haunted portion of the manor. But other than that, like it's the only time in that particular party that Marcello has any sort of connection is when he tries to make connection with Magdalena, who we saw at the very beginning of the movie,
Yes,
and
who
then
just
she
fucking disappears.
she's disinterested. And I feel like that's the real depressing part of this is like when someone might want to try to escape this life and this cycle, but they're surrounded by other people who are just as apathetic and disinterested. And so there's no support mechanism to try and actually escape. You can't do it by yourself. Marcello tries
Because I
reaching
feel
out to
like,
his dad, and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, because I feel like that woman is like not. She's probably having similar feelings that Marcello is feeling, but she's not at that point yet where she's willing to admit it. So she'll still be able to just jump to the next best thing where he's at this. Yeah, that again, that's another part of the movie where I'm like, oh, is this going to be the girl that saves him? No, no one is there to save him. Rome is a desolate pit of apathy.
One of the most interesting things about this, also in Fellini's filmography, is for the longest time he filmed on location and did all that, but this was the start of him building sets at Cinecittà, the studios in Rome, and the street, uh, the big street that you see in the film where he meets up
Where he
with his
meets his dad.
dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Okay.
see it a couple times where he meets Nico to go to the party. Um, that street, the Via Veneto, is a real street in Rome that he was just like this is it's like the rich and famous street of Rome. But Fellini was like, it's not rich and famous enough for my film, so he recreated the whole street on a backlot. It's a backlot set, which is amazing. Um,
That's crazy. I
and
was thinking that during it though. I was like, damn, I can't even imagine filming in a street like this. But it's like what Kubrick did with New York and Eyes Wide Shut.
yeah, and then from my understanding, apparently so many people watched the Dolce Vita and wanted the real Via Veneto to look like that. So the real street in real life started copying the film version of itself,
Damn.
which is that's just amazing. Amazing bit
Is
of
that
art feeding real life.
is that the street where you meet Philip Seymour Hoffman in Mr. Ripley?
I don't know. It could be.
Because it looks similar. Well, I guess all of Italy, whatever. I don't know if they're in Rome. They could.
They're in Rome. Oh,
they are. Okay.
oh, in Talented Mr. Ripley.
Yeah, the movie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know. I think they're Rome. I can't swear to that.
He's
though.
definitely in a sports car. I just want to dedicate this little bit of the discussion to the Marcello Mastroianni anime sunglass thing that he does a lot.
Oh, pushing up his glasses.
Yeah,
Does that in 8.5 too.
he does. He makes it look. Those glasses, I think, on any other human being would look stupid.
Yeah, I think.
But the man just has a face that makes that type of glasses. He should put him in some Oakleys.
If I have this correct, I think Fellini uses those specific glasses again later on in his filmography in Intervista, which is his second to last film, which I just watched, which is interesting. It's like Fellini's Day for Night. It's him
Okay.
kind of filming himself, filming a movie, and the person playing him is wearing those glasses again.
Oh,
Just an interesting little detail. Anyway,
interesting. Yeah.
yes. So the ending, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, because it's kind of opaque in terms of its meaning and what it's trying to get at.
I don't know what the ending is, what it's about, what it means, but I do know it elicits a strong feeling because at that point, again, by the time we get to the ending, I'm like, oh, okay, there's like 2 minutes left in the movie. He's not going to change. So there's like this sort of like, there's like this hopefulness that this little girl has when he's looking at him. It's just kind of like, boof. What are you gonna do? I'm already here.
Yeah.
I'm already partying. What am I gonna do? Fix my life? What am I, French?
Yeah, I kind of had a new revelation as I was thinking and writing notes down about the depressing nihilism of Steiner and Marcello's descent into meaninglessness at the end of the film. I feel like that's Fellini's last ditch attempt at a sign of hope at the end of La Dolce Vita. In this little girl, Paola, I think is her name, her character's name, that she sees the sweet life and she wants that in a way, but she isn't there yet. She's removed. She's the audience in a way, and that like there's this desire to kind of live the life that Marcello is living, but there's also the innocence is still there. There's still hope for the future, that everything, it's this dichotomy. Marcello is the ultimate disillusioned artist, just a blank individual who has had his life kind of like any passion has just been sucked out of his life. And on the other side is this young up and coming girl who has hope for the future, who wants to kind of live that life and doesn't know of any of the darkness that comes with that as well. But there's a chance that it could work out.
Yeah. And it goes back to that whole cyclical nature where people like Steiner and Marcello's father are the people that he looked up to, that he eventually turned into and realized it was all horrible. So I don't know. I guess there's a part of me that thinks that the young girl is smarter than that, but who of us is? We're all dumb.
Yeah, we all want that. That's the thing, is like, as awful and as empty as the sweet life is at the end of La Dolce Vita, Fellini just makes it seem like something you still want. You still want a little taste of that. It's never truly disheartening for the audience. It still has
Which I
some of its
think that's
luster.
that's what's in his look at the end, where he's just like,
It is
what
what
else
it
do I
is.
got?
Yeah.
It is what it is. It's got the good and the bad. It's probably gonna kill me one day, but
But that's the great thing of I love about Fellini's filmography is just the contradictions inherent in so many of his movies, the terribleness of the sweet life, but also the desire to have it as well. It's still there. It's all wrapped up in this movie. It doesn't necessarily condemn or dissuade you from it, but it also doesn't cherry
doesn't
or
make it look good.
sugarcoat. Yeah.
I have to look up. I felt an overwhelming sense of Catholicism in this
Oh
movie.
yeah, no, 100%. I mean, Catholicism, it's a huge part in
It's
Eight and a
everyone
Half.
in it. Yeah.
It's every film. Knights of Cabiria has Catholic tendencies in it as well. Yeah, I also think you kind of have to take that piece of context in also for the final party scene, the ultimate debauchery, because that party is precipitated by one of the characters getting a divorce, which a divorce in Catholicism, especially in Italy, is a huge deal. Actually getting one, so it's something to actually throw a big party over. It's not like getting a divorce in America, where it's just like, oh, just divorced, whatever.
Yeah. Which is also funny because you just assume that that girl Marcella's with, he's married to. He's not, because I think he knows that it would end in divorce and he doesn't want to go.
Go through all that, yeah,
Yeah. I didn't realize Fellini was married to the La Strada girl.
yeah.
Married their whole life until he died.
Juliet Messina.
She died the next year. They both died at age 73.
No,
That's crazy.
yeah. That's the other interesting thing is that him and Julieta were worked constantly on movies together, but there's this 2 movie gap of Dolce Vita and Eight and a Half that she didn't work on. She worked on Knights of Cabiria before it and Juliet of Spirits right after it, but it's these 2 movies. He kind of abandoned her and worked with Marcello for a little bit.
I'm done with working with girls. Give me Marcello.
I mean, he
it's
is
also
the epitome of suave, cool Italian
yeah.
guy.
I do feel like he's more than his muse. But I mean, she did have La Strada and Knights of Cabiria, 2 iconic Fellini movies. But I'm excited to visit that because I've only seen the Marcello movies. So, I mean, I was gonna eventually go through Fellini regardless, but I feel like I was on the fence after both viewings of Eight and a Half being whatever. But this made me want to see everything he did, which wasn't as many as I thought.
No, it's an eminently watchable filmography.
Which I am excited for his batshit crazy stuff at the end, because I always see trailers for that whenever I go to the New Beverly and stuff like City of Women. I'm like, who funded this? Who gave this man money to do this?
Yeah.
His last movie has Roberto Benigni and a guy named Sim, S-I-M, no first last name. It's just Sim. Wonderful.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing is like he's very freeform with narrative in Little Chivita and Eight and a Half, at least comparatively to other movies, and that it's very episodic. But even then, the episodes are kind of like broken up, and it's not neatly fit into categories. It's not like one episode ends, another begins in La Dolce Vita. There's little bits and pieces, little scenes thrown in here. It's not like a strictly formalistic structure.
Yeah.
There's some
which is what I
freedom
like
to it,
about it.
which is like what I like about it too. His later films just go wild with the structure. There is no structure, which really
Okay.
like that's the thing that bothers me the most. But that is also kind of the appeal in that like something like Roma it's essentially just a collage of scenes about Rome. That's what the movie
That
is.
sounds fun.
And whether mileage may vary depending on like how interested you are within like the aesthetics he's putting down or the narrative or lack thereof. But that is kind of his narrative trajectory where he went from kind of your traditional 3-act structure to episodic to just collage.
He tried it all.
Yeah,
He tried it all. I would just like to read this real quick because I thought this was funny.
Okay.
I just scrolled into the reception section of his last film, The Voice of the Moon, starring Roberto Benigni. Aided by the immense popularity in Italy of comic actors Benigni and Villaggio, the film was one of the highest grossing Italian films of the year with a gross of 5.1 million. The film screened out of competition at the 1990 Cannes Film Festival, where it was panned or ignored by the majority of North American critics. One critic boasted, "Absolutely ravishing. I've never been so bored in my life."
Uh,
Wonderful. Went out with a bang.
yeah.
I feel like every big director like this, though, eventually gets some sort of reprisal of his later works. Because I remember for the longest time, people thought Kurosawa's 80s movies were bad. But now people love Dreams and
Sure.
Kagemusha. And Ron, I guess Ron was the...
But Kurosawa got his retrospective. Fellini, they were making films at the same time. He has not gotten his... And he's like, they're available. Fellini is one of the... His filmography has always been very available to people over here. Unlike like some Kurosawa movies and some like Ozu movies, they were very hard to find for the longest time in America. Fellini is not the case. People have had access to all of his early work, his later work, and there has been no...
They just don't care.
I mean, I agree. I think it went off the deep end at the end. They're interesting. They're interesting movies. But
speaking of Ozu, do you know how old Ozu was when he died?
No. 67. Like
60.
Oh.
60 to the day. He was born December 12th, 1903, died December 12th, 63. Perfect symmetry. Very Ozu-like death.
The last thing I'll say about Fellini's filmography in general is that I think he's best in black and white. One, I love the cinematography of both these movies. Gianni Di Venanzo, I believe, is the cinematographer for 8.5 and La Dolce Vita, and just ravishing black and white cinematography. Just the lighting, the way everything looks, it has a beautiful sheen to it. And it's his later films, I feel like it's a sensory overload with color. And I feel like they'd be better if they weren't in color, in that you could kind of like appreciate the visuals more. But when there's just so much, it was just like splashing the frame with everything, that it becomes too much. And that, especially in something like, not so much to this one, because La Dolce Vita is still kind of grounded, but 8.5 works, I feel like, because it is in black and white, because it feels, his surrealism is taking over, but it feels more grounded because of it, that black and white.
I always feel like you could tell a lot about a director by how they reacted to the advent of color. You said people like Kurosawa and Ozu who rejected it for a long time, until inevitably they were just like, well, this is just what we have to do. Whereas people like Hitchcock and Fellini just embraced it and went the other direction, where they went too colorful. Maybe not Hitchcock, but Fellini. You could argue Bergman. Motherfucker loves red.
Yeah. All right. Well, do we think it's one of the best films ever made?
Yeah. I put it high up there.
I do
it's
too.
Pretty fucking good.
It is great. It is a one of a kind cinematic achievement. It's just an amazing film all around, visually, narratively, thematically. I get something new each time I see it.
What I can say more than anything is that it made me actively excited to watch more Italian movies. Which I joke about the French.
It's a miracle.
I love the French. The French have some great
the French.
The French. Italy, not so much. I feel like the best Italian movies are Italian recreations of American movies. That being Sergio Leone's output. Still, very excited. But I'm pretty sure La Strada is somewhere. I think it's on HBO. Yeah, it's on HBO.
I also have this, which
disc. Oh, that's
you
true.
Could borrow.
Which is funny because the Fellini box set came out a few years ago, and they, for some reason, still put La Strada out as a single release.
Well, some people are poor, and maybe they only want to buy the single release. Maybe they don't want Toby. Damn it.
That can't be the name of the movie.
That is the name of the movie. Although that's not in the box set. Although I wish it was. I am annoyed that it's not.
No, you're right. Toby Dammit with someone named Terrence Stamp. Oh, the reviews for this are interesting.
All right, well, check out
What's next?
La Dolce
Should we
Vita.
decide it now?
No, let's not.
Okay.
Let's not pin ourselves down. Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
It'll be something. We will watch something.
It will be a film.
Yes.
It will be spoken in a language you can find on this planet. Cameras will be used, colors, maybe. There will be sound.
We can confirm all of those things.
And it will have been made in the last 200 years.
All right. Well, thank you for watching. Give a like, comment, subscribe. Let us know if you've seen La Dolce Vita and what you thought of it. Let us know Dune 2, your thoughts on the greatest film of the 21st century. End of podcast.
Okay.